Welcome to Dark Sorcery. I'm Alfredo Martinez, and I have with me once again Blair Fox. Blair, it's good to have you on. It's been a minute.
I am glad to be here as always, and yes, it has. Wow, have you've been aware of the changes that have been happening lately? Yeah, there's
Yes, I have. Yes, I have. So today we're going to be talking about human sacrifice, and this is going to be an interesting discussion. Now, first of all, I just want to go ahead and say Uh, Dark Sorcery does not condone human sacrifice. Do not harm yourself or others. This is for educational purposes. Now that I got that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about the topic. Now, I want to start out a quote here from Anton LaVey's Satanic Bible. Now, I know this has really nothing to do with human sacrifice, but there's a paragraph that I want to start out with that he lays out, which I think would be a good introduction here. This is from the Book of Lucifer, page 87. The supposed purpose in performing the ritual of sacrifice is to throw the energy provided by the blood of the freshly slaughtered victim into the atmosphere of the magical working, thereby intensifying the magician's chances of success. Now, Blair, comparing that statement to human sacrifice, how accurate is that statement?
it's fairly accurate for the assumption that it takes. But as with most things, we are talking about very old and sacred practices. And it was not the practice that lost its way, but the individual. So, whereas that's an excellent start for a theosophical lens, so to speak, I'm hoping that what we wind up uncovering tonight are the genesis points of the alchemy and the science, and to see if there are other ways of tapping the gods, or if this is definitely something needed. Because it's very important for our ethic. We need to know what is murder, because we shouldn't be crossing that threshold if we don't have to.
Yeah, so now concerning human sacrifice, um, back to LeVay, what he was saying, and I'm going to get off the subject of LeVay. I just wanted to get this out of the way. After that, he goes on to saying, uh, instead of uh, killing animals for sacrifice, you should use yourself, your own vessel, which you can do it that way, but that's not necessarily the way I would do it, because if you use your own energy, what I say is using your own energy for the sacrifice. Um, that would be depleting your life force, and also, like taking years off your life and making you look old. Now, you can use yourself as an energy force for the sacrifice, but I think it'd be better to pull energy from somewhere else. That way you don't deplete your own life force and knock off years off your life. What do you think about that?
That's exactly correct. So I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Eli Mercury, but he made a commentary once on that there were different vampiric gates, and that 6 out of the 7 were all curses. And one, he describes the states very similar to how you were just talking about people. And I brought that to address in the community, that a lot of our bumps that we hit are due to a lack of synthesis. We're not approaching these sciences like the battery. You need the positive and the negative to create the ground. And so in this case, it would be, in this analogy, most likely it would be something like tapping into one of the tunnels of set entities and feeding off of them, because they feed off of all things non-source. It would be no different than tapping a wellspring. And that would be one method, theoretically.
Mm, I agree. Now, one thing I want to bring up is the fact that concerning human sacrifice from different cultures all around the world, there have been bloodless forms of killing that have been used, such as drowning and strangulation in different cultures, which does not spill the blood. Now, in your opinion, what would be the difference between killing somebody for ritual sacrifice instead of spilling the blood and using forms like strangulation or drowning?
Well, that was very well articulated. So there's many key factors we can decode with that. So, like, as far as opinions go, I believe at all costs we must know the gnosis, and not like in the Nazi way. It should never have to get that far. If you are at the part where you're willing to be a monster, but you're not being rendered as one, that is a choice. The principles of sacrifice, by its definition, imply that the first practices of this were willing. They were probably worshipers, and they probably took it as like the highest honor or something. And you know, when you're willing to die for your god, you can understand the cultures like the Mayans and the Sumerians a bit more. Um, as far as the imprint on the environmental background, there are certain grimoires that will teach you about what I would call subtle gateways. We talk elemental, celestial, you name it. And so, in the initiatory context, if anything were to happen to the soul, it were to be exposed during its death gates in one of these environments, it's suggested that that soul would go to that realm. So, if you're being drowned in water, then your energy goes to water. If you're being strangled by somebody, that's sheer, that's energetic domination to an extent, and one that is of sheer domination, more on the dominant side than sexual. One would agree, and so that would be an impression. I believe that would be something that would result in that soul being probably bonded to that entity. And of course, we have the satanic ritual types that we don't like to talk about for obvious reasons. In which
Okay.
case, that goes into the creation of something called a nagual. But that's where my information currently ends, because I've yet to figure out exactly what that is. Only that the phenomena causes you to develop 4 lobes instead of 2.
Now, I'm glad you brought the brought up the fact that the soul gets tied to, you know, where the body dies, because in some parts of Africa, some of the slaves of the deceased were buried alive with the person, or killed and buried beneath the deceased to accompany them in the afterlife. Some cultures, they slaughter servants or slaves intended to accompany the deceased in the afterlife. So I would say that that ties right in with what you were just saying. Would you agree with that?
Yes, but the nature, it almost feels like they were trying to address generational trauma on the matter. Yeah, if you are going to create a trauma impression to then feed to the earth, that ties in. When it's ritual practice, I mean, that ties in. That's a higher generational line. That is a nematon made of the very soil. That's pretty potent. But like the willingness to indulge the trauma of it all, that's the more interesting part.
Yeah, just like in Aztec culture, when uh, you know, some people were they willingly sacrificed themselves and willingly gave up their lives for the sacrificial rite. I mean, that was something that was very, very common among Aztec society.
And that was interchangeable with the foundations of worship, of what the word originally was created for. To right, as the science is broken down, the act of worship, and for those of you that don't know, it is the much different than belief. Belief is the affirmation to create your reality. That is your human right. But this is different. This is more. Um, I'm sorry, I literally just glitched. Please say that
No,
again.
you're fine. We were talking about how in Aztec society it was common to willingly give up your life for the right.
Yes. And so, in that, if you are willing sacrifice, that is the greatest act of devotion and of worship. You are giving your entire existence to this thing. And that would also, bring full circle a condition to where you would rapidly experience the phases of transmutation as an energy. Energy never dies, but your sense of self probably would. I mean, who can say? For certain people, probably can, but I cannot.
Right. Okay. So now, oftentimes, ritual sacrifice is done for communing with a god or a deity, or empowering a magical rite. Um, what would you say are other reasons for human sacrifice besides those two?
Well, something interesting just did pop into my mind as you were finishing. right? Think of it like this. Our inability to harness greater divine concepts is entirely because of our need to personalize with the relevance of our humanity. The more you step outside of it and you look at the variables of the human life, you start to notice, right? All life on this planet is a tachyonic electromagnetic charge, right? And it exists bioplasma. These are all conditions of the fourfold reality. These are all alchemical components. And so, in a matter of speaking, you are recreating from that which created the vessel. Now, what you would do with that, I mean, we can go over the notions on how those types of conditions can create gateways. That would definitely be something that certain kinds of entities would need for influence and or connection. Then everything else in the book goes to that archon stuff.
So would you agree that the recreation is dependent upon your intention going into the rite? If you're just someone who is kicking and screaming and being sacrificed, you know, the recreation is going to be a whole lot different than as if you are a willing sacrifice.
Oh, it's still a sacrifice. It took me a while to rack that around my brain. It's just, this is where we get into the abused currents, right? Because if I am you and you are me, then the act of willing another's will, especially under the conditions, to a life form that has not awoken all 14 subtle bodies and therefore operations of mind, their ego is not necessarily a choice, although we would indulge it to, you know, make them not freak out. In that regard, on one hand, you are killing something inside of yourself because of what you've done, and on the other hand, you have a double paradox, because the entity is still going to be fed nonetheless. As far as the soul would most likely reincarnate. I mean, if the soul is one part of multiple factors of the spirit, it's safe to assume that the soul probably reincarnates to restart whatever its journey was.
Okay. Now, I want to take note of different kinds of human sacrifices that were practiced other than the cultures that we mentioned. So, for instance, in Assyrian and Canaanite culture, burning children was very common, and at times the Israelites would participate in that as well. And of course, you have the Aztec and the African sacrifices that we had just mentioned. Um, Now, this reminds me of a post that we did as Dark Sorcery. We put up a poster that is now being passed around about spider ink, where you can take spiders and you can sacrifice the spiders, and then the mixture of all that, you can use that to actually um, use ink to go ahead and commune with demons. So
That's
I
brilliant.
imagine it's, yeah, yeah. In fact, I'll send you the instructions. I'll send you the poster that we did with instructions on how to contact demons by a mixture of smashed and ground up spiders. It's a process, but it could be done.
It's The spider is a archetype that brings with it many of the elements of the witch, right? You have
Mm.
the suspender of life, you have the giver of death. The 8 legs represent the 8th sphere, which is, of course, the abyss and Nodens. It is a silk weaver, right? And therefore a storyteller, and therefore a soothsayer. But it's also the predator, the vampire. It is fate, it is death, um, it is all the things that suspend time in a moment. Now, compared to a human being, if you're trying to do this, presumably the sacred way, like the whole 9 yards, you're accounting for a person's natal chart, their human design, the conditions, probably even the moon that they were born under, leading all the way up to the correct planetary day to do it. And so what would you say to that?
I would say that makes perfect sense. I mean, it is sort of a predator. It's predatory in nature, and it's considered one of the things that creep upon the earth. It's definitely got the vibration of it, and just the way it makes people react. You know, I'm not saying everybody reacts that way, but it's kind of like, some people, to the average person, when a demon is around, they kind of shiver or get the creeps. Same, a lot of people get the same reaction when they see a spider. I guess it would depend on what kind it is, but just that nature, that, as far as the same way people react to it, like the correspondences, like attracts like. So it really wouldn't surprise me that that there would be a demonic connection with that.
And the interesting thing about that is, on one hand, you have the obvious science of attuning to a spirit, and most people that are conditioned, one would say, they don't have both their poles activated. And if they're not serious about the work and they've just trolleyed on to the nearest community, then they're probably screwing around with shit, and they don't even have a progenitor. And for those of you that don't know, a progenitor is like a training wheel representative guardian. So if you're working the positive current and you're serious about it, you're going to call on Ra, and Ra represents your right hand. And then when you initiate the negative current to activate your negative pole, you would call on Lucifer. So Ra in your right hand and Lucifer in your left. And this creates the conditions for what some might call the golden flame. That's a totally different topic. But it's important to know that you have to take charge of your polarities, because the first influence, just like a baby, just like a child, just like a teenager, the first influence that touches your pole is going to be the direct factor of what exactly wakes you up and what have you taken on with you.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Yeah.
These are two forces that on both ends of the spectrum want to see you evolve. Now, can you say that for every positive or every negative? Because the biggest lesson in this, people, is that there's good and evil in all three poles. The light, the shadow, the darkness, and everything is all either source, in which case it is unified through its dynamic, or it is parasitic, in which case all three of them are separate, poisonous, and will lead to your death.
I like what you said, because you mentioned about the poles. I do believe that if you're not balanced, if you don't have your poles activated and you're not balanced, you're going to get the wrong influences. And there are spirits that are looking for a way in to those who don't have their poles activated, to just go ahead and sneak in. I mean, you could end up, some people could end up possessed and end up doing things that they don't intend to. Sometimes that's the reason why some people say things that they don't mean, or they do things that they wish they could take back, because it's like, and then people say, well, what's gotten into you? No, they literally, what's gotten into them? You know what I mean? That's where that comes from. Would you agree?
Yes. Now, what's always fascinated me, because individuals like me and yourself, we get to have the more romantic sides of our dark companions compared to other people. I've always wondered, is it the Lord that resides over the fractured energy that's actually doing the possessing, or is it a variable to an external factor that's created from the point of separation in the person? What if they create, quote unquote, the body of said demon within them, and then the closest energy signature to that external fills the space?
I think that it depends on the person. I think it depends on the person and their state of mind, and just where they're at the moment. I mean, it could go either way.
So the ultimate reason for discussions such as the one we're having tonight is because whether people acknowledge it yet, we have really touched that Aquarius gate. Like, we are heading in areas where our curiosity is active once more, and we are ready to acknowledge that we are a predatory species, but we are not ready to acknowledge that we are evil, that we seek nothing more than to destroy ourselves from the inside out. There's a reason and a purpose for these things. And in order for us to have the rights to evolve, we really need to know what's what and how is how.
Yeah, definitely. I just want, just a side note, since we had talked about the spider and the sacrifice and demonic contact, at the end of the video, I'm going to throw in that poster with the instructions, so people can know exactly what the full context of what we're talking about at that time. But aside from that, is there anything else about human sacrifice that you want to go ahead and mention before we call it a night?
Yes, I do. And I want to forego a warning that some of the content you may hear may be disturbing. But all things in the name of knowledge for the evolution of all souls. I have in my possession the Book of Cain, and it, in summary, from what I've read in the past, it gives many stereotypes to things that you would presume. And if Cain is a beloved brother of Source, then there needs to be a logic here. And so here is my take for the finishing statement of the night. To those of you that are on the level to understand what it means when I say the transmigration of souls, it may be implied that every God force that your bloodline came Genesis 2 and then worked all the way to the point of you and what God force you represent, it is no different than the female taking 10% of the seed of every man she sleeps with to create new genes, new possibilities. All this is great and beautiful, except when you bring the demiurge into factor. That does bring a paper trail, an investigation, so to speak, because everything that the demiurge touches, we already know where that goes. And so if there is an imbalance, and if that has anything to do with the chaos that's in the world today, then this book is the course correction. The dark hunters, the ones that aren't afraid to sacrifice those parts of themselves to work literally on behalf of the universe itself, to course correct, to rebalance, to ensure that the transmigration of souls is ever going, ever present, and not stagnating. And that's the best I got, because honestly, yeah, I refuse to accept that there are certain currents that just exist to implode the other. So that is my professional evaluation of the matter.
My advice would be to be in contact with your higher self, look inward, and you will know if that's the path for you or if it's something else. So that's what I have to say about that.
That was a great thing to bring up. Let me finish with this. Be warned. Be warned. Anybody that is not of the intellect to know at base level what we're talking about, do not attempt these practices. Not because you're the shit, but because the gods that represent these things will fuck you up for an eternity. If you decide to fuck around with this shit and find out, this is not the time. Learn about this shit, but don't look for this shit. We are not looking for excuses to stab people. We are looking to determine ritual from murder. And remember that.
Well said. Well said. Well, that's been a very, very good conversation. I'm sure we'll talk more on this in the future in future videos. Everyone who's watching, make sure you check out Blair Fox's social media stuff. Links below in the video description. Thanks again, Blair, for your time. And everyone you're welcome. And everyone who's watching, make sure you like and subscribe to Dark Sorcery.